Hey, welcome to our New York Giants preservation meeting for tonight. It is November 7th, uh, 2024. Tonight we have Skip Nipper, who contributed to the Team That Time Won't Forget book about the 1951 Giants. Before we get to Skip, I also want to thank Skip. He changed the date so he could be able to speak to us today. We had an opening due to a cancellation. So, Skip, thank you so much. Our next meeting, there'll be no meeting next week. The following week, it's going to be on a Tuesday night. That's when the author could speak. His name is Tom Alfarth, and Tom wrote a brand new book called Perfect Eloquence, An Appreciation of Vin Scully. Now, why would we have Vin Scully here? Vin Scully, besides being probably the greatest announcer of all time, Hall of Famer, grew up as a New York Giant baseball fan. So that's our little road inward to talking about Vin Scully. And as you all know, our highest rated or how many people came was for Carl Erskine, another Dodger. So I think we had 96 people that night. So anyway, this is the great book that Skip contributed. He's going to be talking about Henry Schenz. Um, Not many of you know about him. Uh, it is a wonderful story, and Skip is going to share that with us. So why don't we all welcome Skip Nipper? Skip, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me. Full disclosure, when I was 10 years old, on my 10th birthday, my grandfather asked me who I was for in the World Series. And I said, "Who's playing?" And he said, I'll date myself. He said, "The Pittsburgh Pirates and the New York Yankees." And I said, "Granddaddy, who are you for?" And he said, "The Pittsburgh Pirates. The Yankees always win." And I thought, if they always win, I'll be for the Yankees, and I have been ever since. So I'll give that apology up front, although it has been mentioned. And yes, it was a terrible inning, that inning in game 5. But I even missed Bible study that night because I'm a Yankees fan. I wanted to be sure and see the outcome of that game. So anyway, thank you for having me. I got started. I'll tell you how I got started. I got started by reading this book, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, Joshua Prager's book. I had read it when it first came out. Um, that's what piqued my interest. And also something else that had piqued my interest for several years now, a little over 20 years, I've been collecting photographs, primarily Nashville Vols photographs. And one of them that I was able to collect is this one. I'm not sure you can see it through my camera, but this is a Hank Schenz. It's a staged photograph at Sulphur Dale. You can't see that, can you? He's got a Vols uniform on and he's sliding into third. There's a couple of people out in the outfield that are in street clothes. But I knew from that I had to know more. And that's why I collect those photographs, because if it's got on the back the date, it just says 1947 Nashville Vols, Hank Schenz. I don't know where it was published. I'm guessing in one of the local newspapers. So that I put those two things together when the book was they were asking for authors for the book, and I saw Hank Schenz named there. I was fortunate, as anyone who wants to learn more about a certain player is able to speak with one of the family members. And I was able to contact Jim Schenz, his son, who was a little hesitant to talk to me. I'm not sure that he was really anxious about talking to me, didn't want to divulge any information. But after we warmed up to each other, he was free and willing to tell me things. Now, afterwards, some questions arose, and I tried to contact him again, not only through his phone number, but also through email, and I never got a response. I have not checked on him in some time. But that's the gist of what I wrote about. Hank Schenz seems to have been an often injured baseball player, one who hooped and hollered on the infield, lots of chatter, I think, who studied the game and was what what his manager, Larry, and even Larry Gilbert here in Nashville, who was the general manager at the time, and oh, excuse me, he was the manager in 1947, felt like he would be an addition that they sorely needed after the first couple of months of the season when the Nashville Vols infield had already committed 50 errors. So that was kind of the direction that I wanted to go, to learn all these different things about Hank Schenz. And then, of course, the crowning piece to that was learning about the telescope. And the telescope, Jim told me, his son told me, that he did not have a hobby for astronomy. He was like a lot of ball players in those days. He was stealing signs. And even I was even able to find out through Jim, he corroborated it, that the Cubs, when Schenz was with the Cubs, that he actually went to the scoreboard there and stole signs. Now, I don't think it was advanced enough there as it became at the Polo Grounds in 1951, where the signs were relayed and the buzzer signal, the dugout, whether all those things actually fell into place that way or not. But I do find it interesting that Herman Franks, the third base coach, was no longer on the field when Schenz showed up, and Leo DeRocher found out that there was a telescope that could be peered through from the DeRocher's office in center field at the Polo Grounds. Does any of that make sense to you? Is anything you have any comments about those things?
Why
Any
don't
comments?
why don't Skip finish your presentation whenever you're done,
Okay.
and then
All
we're
right.
going to do a Q&A with you.
Okay, gotcha.
There is one thing somebody brought up. Is your background blurred on purpose because that's why you couldn't see the
Oh,
pictures?
oh, that's why. I know. I think I just did that out of whatever reason. I'll try to. I can't knock that out right now.
Don't worry about it then.
Yeah, we'll look at it in a little bit. But yeah, I can certainly take care of that. And then the big question that I asked his son, whatever happened to that telescope? Now, I don't know if y'all have ever had any discussion about that again before or not. He didn't know. He thought a collector had it was put up for auction by one of the relatives or something. I don't really know. I don't. He didn't seem to know whether his dad kept it or whether one of the Giants personnel kept it, but it ended up at auction, he thought. And from there, he does not know. And I'm interested to know if anyone has any feelings about that or any knowledge about that. Um, Undoubtedly, Schenz was an excellent baseball player, grew up near Cincinnati. He retired to Cincinnati. In fact, his dad told me that baseball was his life. After he retired, he was good friends with Sparky Anderson, would actually throw batting practice at the Reds games, before the Reds games. And he became an umpire in local amateur leagues, called a game, walked off the field, and had a heart attack and passed away. So his ball playing, his ball participation, his umpiring, all of those things were a normal part of his life. He was a graduate of New Richmond High School in that area. He was offered to play baseball for the University of Cincinnati. He was signed instead by the Cincinnati Reds, traded to the Chicago Cubs, and he went through a series of trades where he ended up with Pittsburgh with Branch Rickey. And I think undoubtedly his knowledge of the game, his participation, his talent for the game, probably able to get signals, all was appealing. And when the Giants acquired him in the 1951 season, DeRocher found out that he had that telescope. Well, that story continues on. After the 51 season, he ended up going through several stages. He ended up being the manager of the Tulsa Drillers, I think was the name, Tulsa, where he was also played, was an MVP of that team. He had been in the United States Navy. He had his father was a postal clerk, and when Hank Schenz went to the Navy, he ended up at Norfolk, and he worked in the postal office. That makes a natural reason, I think, for him to be in there, because his dad had some experience there. But as it was the case with professional baseball players who went into the service, he also played baseball. Um, Sadly, his mother and father in 1944 were killed in a car wreck. and his sister was injured in that wreck. He returned to the Norfolk mailroom where he continued his service until he finished and was discharged, honorably discharged. He'd been to Hawaii and played baseball there. Um, he began his 1946 season with the Cubs top affiliate in Los Angeles when Angels third baseman Elmer Rabbit Mallory re-injured an ailing leg. Schenz, who was a rookie, got a chance to play, and I think he earned his stripes because of his talent. Um, let's see, he was called up by the Cubs late in the season. The Nashville, the Cubs' other affiliate, needed that infielder. Larry Gilbert needed an infielder because his infield was performing so well. And that's where you read about he didn't complete the whole season because he often got injured in Nashville with the sliding into a base and injuring an ankle. Um, uh, uh, One of the sports writers wrote, with his hitting, his speed, his arm, and his defensive ability, Hank Schenz may be the best all-around player Nashville has had since Ed Sauer. Now, Ed Sauer in 1943 had led the Southern Association in batting with 368, doubles with 51, runs 113, and stolen bases, and had 200 hits. So that's pretty powerful. I don't think Schenz had that kind of a season as expected, but I think even his bench work when he was sitting on the bench for Larry Gilbert was a valuable asset there. Played in 99 games during the season, had a hip injury, ankle injury. Um, let's see, he was hitting 359 at one time, and he was in Memphis, and he broke his ankle sliding into a base. But that was kind of the thing that went on and on with him. He continued to be injured, seems like all the time. He was destined to become the Chicago Cubs third baseman, along with Peanuts Lowry. That's who Charlie Grimm actually wanted them to be competition to each other for the third base position, and neither one of them got it because they claimed Emil Verben off of waivers that season, and he started at second base actually for the rest of the season. Let's see. Uh, Jim Schenz recalled an unusual story his father had told him. In one game playing second for the Cubs, my father ran out for a fly ball, and even though the outfielder had called Dad off, they collided, and the outfielder suffered a broken collarbone. His manager told him he hustled too much. And Dad told him, if you don't want guys who hustle, then you don't want me. And I'm guessing that's, let's see, that would be, who did I say was a manager? Charlie Graham. I imagine that was Charlie Graham. It sounded unusual for me to tell someone that they hustle too much. But I think if there was a comparison to anybody today, it would be a Pete Rose. Just didn't have the complete talent like Pete Rose, who was uninjured most of his career. And this was the case where he was injured often. He moved up to Minneapolis, to St. Paul rather, where his manager was Walt Austin, and Walt Austin loved him. Walt Austin eventually was the one who said that when Schenz was sold to the Pittsburgh Pirates, who the general manager was Branch Rickey, that he had lost one of the best infielders that he felt like he'd ever coached. There's an interesting aspect to the Pittsburgh Pirates trading. Schenz failed to win a starting job with the Pirates, but caught on as a utility infielder. I'm going to have to read a little bit here. Bouncing between second, short, and third. And on June the 3rd at Forbes Field, he led off the Pirates' first inning with a home run off Johnny Same, who I think Johnny Same's birthday is today, and played in 58 games. In early 1951, brought more of the same and saw little action, and playing in only 25 games, he was sent on waivers to the Giants. Now, a transaction that did not occur that could have changed the course of baseball history is the Sporting News reported on August the 15th, 1951, that the Minneapolis Millers general manager, Rosie Ryan, sought to acquire Schenz from the Giants, the Millers parent club, but at the last minute, the St. Louis Browns blocked the move by entering a claim for Schenz. I heard Browns mentioned a while ago. Schenz could have taken his Wallensack telescope to St. Louis to the manager there, Zach Taylor, instead of Leo DeRocher. Now, the Browns were out of the running and finished 52 and 102, and the Giants, however, accomplished that feat that's so famous of winning the pennant in a three-game playoff with the Dodgers. And I think that's an important aspect of that. I know you mentioned, I want to change a little bit of my course here for a second. You mentioned a few weeks ago asking about anyone who had been to that game, the Bobby Thompson shot heard around the world. My dad grew up across the street from a man named Joe Casey. Joe Casey became Nashville's police chief. Joe Casey played 5 years in the minor leagues, was a tremendous pitcher, but he hurt his arm. He was with the Boston Braves, never made it to the majors, but he did play with a few of the major league players, like Warren Spahn. He hurt his arm, and they sent him back to Boston, I believe, maybe Chicago, and to help his arm, they took out his adenoids and his appendix. He always told me he thought that was a strange diagnosis for a hurt arm. So Joe retired after 5 years because he told his wife that if he didn't make it to the majors in 5 years, he would retire. And he did. In 1951, he pitched semi-pro ball here for a DuPont team out of Old Hickory. And they had a terrific team, and they won the semi-pro amateur City League championship. And the championship team was awarded a trip to New York. One of the side trips that they took was to the Giants game. Bobby Thompson hit that home run. Now, Joe died 2 years ago. He was born July the 31st, 1926. He told me when my dad died, they were so close, he called me up and he said, I wouldn't mind if you just started calling me Uncle Joe. So if I say Uncle Joe, we're not related, but he was my Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe, on his birthday, July the 31st, 2022, when he would have been 96, he passed away on his birthday, was a wonderful man. Just a few weeks after the ball game, he started his job with the Metro Police Department. At that time was the Nashville Police Department. And he later became police chief that he served his 16-year tenure with. Now, the interesting part to that, and I put a little bit of that in, if you go to baseballinnashville.com, and there's a search bar there, and you can put in Casey, and you can read my story about Joe Casey, among others. Joe Casey and I were sitting in his living room about 3 years ago, and I told him a story that I had heard about some nuns. A nun had gotten that baseball, and I guess you may be familiar with that story, what happened to it, that it was thrown into the river. I don't know the exact details. I was sitting there in Uncle Joe's living room, and I told him that story, and he said, Skip, we were sitting in left field, and there was a bunch of nuns sitting about 5 rows in front of me. And so I thought that was an interesting connection to Nashville. I just wanted to kind of share that. So I knew someone who was at that game. There were others on that DuPont team that I couldn't name, but that was a closeness there he said, I just know they were down there scrambling for that baseball. The nuns were right there with them. That's all I know. I mean, I can't complete that story beyond that, except for the connection that you were asking, Gary, about those who had attended that game. I wish Uncle Joe was still living because he was so vivid in his memory of ball games and instances of things like that. I mean, if I just mentioned it, he said, well, Skip, there were some nuns sitting right down there in front of him. So that's how close he was to the game. I'm not going to go into much more detail about the game itself, other than I just wonder whatever happened to the telescope. I hope maybe somebody knows. I hope someone has it in good stead. I hope that you'll look back on Schenz's career through some of the online sites that gives you more information about him. I think that's the gist of what I'd like to tell you folks tonight. Let's see. I do know that he played with a famous Negro leaguer, Piper Davis, at one time. Played out in the Pacific Coast League with him, and I thought that was an interesting connection too. Let's see. I think pretty much that's it. I think Roger Maris was on his roster with Tulsa maybe too. So little connections like that, I
Skip,
think, are very, very important.
I'll ask you a couple of questions that
Sure.
so Schenz, he didn't get to play much with the Giants. He was basically a bench jockey, correct?
Correct.
So the telescope is up in the Giants clubhouse. They hit a buzzer to relay to the bullpen, who relays to the batter, correct?
That's as I understand it, yes.
So what is Henry Schenz doing? Just sitting near DeRocher? He brings the telescope, but what is his part of it after that? Is because he didn't get into many games, I know.
No, I don't know whether he was helping interpret signals or what, because undoubtedly, according to his dad, he was good at it. I just know the story as I've read it in the Prager book uh, oh shoot, Herman Franks came off the third baseline and went to DeRocher's office and stuck the telescope through the blinds,
Right.
and then they were relaying that information down to the third base or bench or the third base coach.
What happened to Hank after the 51 season?
He continued in minor league ball.
I'm talking
Uh,
about with the Giants. Did his career end with the Giants?
it
And
ended with the Giants. Yeah, yeah, yeah. For example, he went to Oakland and he played. He went to Venezuela and played. He went to Sacramento. Let's see, he went to 55. He was with Sacramento. Then he ended up at Tulsa. He was named manager and part-time third baseman. That was a Cleveland farm club. And let's see, I think that's where his career ended. I think that's where his career
and
ended.
my other question to you is, when you spoke to his son,
Hmm.
was he reluctant to talk because he he, he knew it was an illegal thing to do, or what was your sense?
I asked him that, and he didn't think he no, he didn't seem like he was. He was very free and open with me. In fact, he's the one that told me that he felt like his dad felt like he was a Pete Rose kind of a player. I think that he was very open. It just seemed like maybe he had said enough. He just kind of didn't say any more to me. What didn't want to make himself accessible to me. Maybe he had spoken to too many people
Right.
about that particular instance.
All right, we're gonna open it up, and I know Harvey's gonna use the word alleged. So, Harvey, go ahead. Unmute yourself, Harvey.
Yes, yes, I know, Gary. I muted myself. First of all, I love listening to your voice. I love country music, and I imagine you spin a couple of good records somewhere.
Yeah, well, I can't sing, but I can listen.
And
We're in country music country, but country music has changed over the years. It's not
yeah,
Conway Twitty anymore.
no, it's changed, but it's still country.
No doubt.
Um, Listen, I was born in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx, and I love country.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah,
That book the story you told about the ball that Bobby hit into the stands, into the lower left field stands, and they're
yeah,
going crazy.
yeah.
That ball is the subject of a book called The Ball. I'm pretty sure I've been trying
Miracle Ball.
The Miracle Ball. Thank
Miracle.
you. Thank you, Gary. And yes, it was supposedly retrieved by a nun and eventually wound its way somewhere in the Midwest. I read that book 20 years ago, so I can't remember 20 minutes ago what I did. Um, uh, I had the good fortune. I've told this story. Some of you guys could tune out if you don't want to hear it again. But I had the good fortune to meet Bobby Thompson a dozen times, have dinner with him, have lunch with him. And specifically on October 15th, 2003, I owe Gary the certificate of authenticity, which he lost, which I gave him.
Did I'm
But
sorry.
I had lunch at a lovely restaurant in Watchung, New Jersey, less than a mile from Bobby's house. In attendance was my dear friend, Bill Murphy. Billy died in 2010. Billy at the time was finishing up his 20-year career as district attorney of Richmond County, which is Staten Island. Bobby was known as the Staten Island Scot. If you recall the story, after he hit the home run, he took the subway, got off the Staten Island ferry where his brother, who was a firefighter, picked him up and said to him, "Bobby, do you know what you just did?" He says, "Yeah, we beat the Dodgers." Bobby had it right. The Giants won the pennant, but they beat the Dodgers. He had it in the correct order. So we had lunch, and I'm not going to go into this whole part of the story, but I had a discussion with Bobby about hitting, and I said that Barry Bonds, and this was 2003. I don't want to hear anything about PEDs. Barry was a great hitter. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. But I said that, in my opinion, Barry was the greatest hitter I ever saw. Prior to that time, prior to Barry, I said I thought it was Ted Williams. Bobby told a story about taking batting practice at Fenway Park. Bobby finished his career playing for the Cubs and the Red Sox, and the story is terrific. I'll tell the whole story some other time, but Ted Williams, after Barry took BP, as he said to me, I was taking BP at Fenway, the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I mean, he says, that you take 5 shots, take 5 pitches, and then jog to the outfield. I couldn't hit a foul ball in high school. So I don't know what BP at Fenway. Anyway, he said Ted Williams was talking to him about batting. And Bobby's line to Ted was, Ted, where were you 15 years ago? Bobby Thompson on October 15th, 2003. We were in after lunch. We went back to his house. We were sitting in the kitchen, and he was signing baseballs, one of which I gifted to Gary, one of which went to my synagogue for auction, one of which went to a church of one of my good friends who wanted to auction it all. Also, just put the religion in there. I want everybody to understand that. And we were talking about anything but the home run, because we had talked ourselves out about the home run. And Bobby then said, "Have you heard about the stories about the sign stealing?" And my heart stopped, because I didn't know what he was about to reveal to me. And I was about to give him a lawyer-like gibberish about it didn't matter. Help me out here, Jim. You can give me some lawyer-like gibberish. And Bobby then stops me and says, "It was legal, Now I'm really not breathing, because I figured he's going to tell me but he told me he knew the Giants were stealing signs, but he did not get the sign that pitch. And he said the reason was because Sal Evars, who was in the right field bullpen, got it wrong more often than not. And Bobby hit the home run. Now, I'm biased. I'm a Giants fan. I've had dinner with Bobby a number of times. Bobby passed away in 2010, July or August of 2010. But I believe him. I believed him. He was credible. He did not get the sign. Now, the last part I will tell you is I first met him in January or February of 1995. It was at a dinner on Staten Island, a banquet, actually, of the Staten Island Old Time Baseball Players Association. We can all belong to them if you played any kind of stickball, punchball, basketball, any kind of ball. And my late wife, who grew up in Brooklyn, a Dodgers fan, she had it. I knew she had it prepared. So we're walking into the banquet hall. She says to Bobby, "By the way, Bobby, I grew up a Dodgers fan." And she says it with a chuckle and a laugh, and she wants to get him in the... And Bobby, who towered over us, I'm 5'10", Helen was 5'6", Bobby was 6'3", and Bobby turns to her and says, and remember the line is, "Bobby, I grew up a Dodgers fan," and Bobby says, "That's okay, dear. My father was a Dodgers fan." And then without missing a beat, he turns to me and says, "Until I sign with the Giants." Bobby Thompson was a humble man who never. I have last story I'll tell you. Gary, shut me up if I'm going too long. There was a dinner honoring my friend Bill Murphy upon his retirement. He had been appointed a federal judge. He never ascended to the bench because he succumbed to the ravages of diabetes. But there was a big, a well-attended dinner on Staten Island, and Billy assigned me and Helen to sit with Bobby because Bill had a separate table for his family and there was no room for anybody else. Bill had a big family. So in the room, there were over 400 people at this dinner, and it was a lot of, you can imagine, a lot of lawyers, judges, district attorneys of the four counties. One county didn't show up, Kings County, Brooklyn, but that's another story. We're not allowed to talk politics. And these judges, these lawyers would go to Bill's table, which was right next to ours, and then come over to Bobby. And Bobby always stood up, even though he'd be eating. He would stop what he was doing. He'd take a napkin and then he'd stand up. He was always proper. And at one point he said to me, he says, "Boy, this is a big deal. Bill must be really important." I said, "Bobby, there's a lot of important people in this room, but there's only one guy who ever put foot on a Major League Baseball field, and only one guy who ever hit a home run that'll never be forgotten." Bobby looked at me and he said, "Wow." He's a great guy. Thank you for helping us bring back those memories, and thank you, Gary, for allowing me to finish.
All right. Bill Clink, you're up.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Skip. When I read your bio, I knew that we did want to talk a little bit about Hank Schenz. I really wanted to ask you, being that you are from Nashville, if you might share with us, those of us who really like ballparks, and certainly two of the best, if you could share your memories, and they were so iconoclastic, both Sulphur Dell and Rushwood Park in Memphis. You probably know both, seen them. They were just unbelievable. Now, I think they both burned down, was it? I know Rushwood burned down, didn't it?
Rushwood burned down on Easter Sunday. I forget the year, 1960, I think. It was next to Methodist Hospital.
Yeah.
That's where Elvis Presley was taken when he.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, and
I don't have one of Dell. I don't have one of Sulphur Dell. I wish I did.
Yeah, my friend Clarence Watkins is our area Memphis fan. He grew up in Memphis and lives in Birmingham. And he was there at that time. I think he and his dad drove over and watched that part burn. He would have been about 10 years old too. Yeah. But the fire was so hot that they had to move patients from that side of the hospital to the other side of the hospital. You could not touch the windows because the fire was so hot. I think it was a cold day, and I think someone had started a fire in the stands. And there's some connection to the White Sox playing. The White Sox played the Indians, I think, that day. Mm-hmm. And there's the curse of Rocky Colavito. I think, don't hold me to these. I think that's the one that the manager called him in from second base and said, "You've been traded to Detroit." And that evening, the park burned down, and they call that the Colavito curse. Was that? It had a large, tall. They had a smokestack from a laundry. They call it the laundry tower that was out there out in left field, and the batters would take a swing at that. Sulphur Dell was part of Athletic Park back in the 1860s on until 1927. After the 26th season, batters would face the setting sun. You know, in those days there were no lights, so games started at 3:30. So by the end of the game, as the sun was setting, it would set over the state capitol from home plate. So in 1926, after that season, the owners were in bad financial shape, so they sold it to some people who actually turned the ballpark around so that the batter's back would be at the capitol and they would be facing the other way. It didn't help the center fielder, I don't think, but that was the reason. Of course, they added lights 4 years later, I think. And Grantland Rice.
How did they get its name, Sulphur Dell?
Yeah, Grantland Rice gave it that name in 1908 while he was here. He also called the ball team the Nashville Volunteers for the first time. He ran a contest with two other newspapers here where folks could write in with the names. Oddly enough, there were three names to choose from. One was Lime Rocks. Middle Tennessee is known for lime rock in the ground. I mean, you can't go down very far without hitting lime rock. The second choice was Rocks, which was just a shortened Lime Rock. Now, I think today the Nashville Rocks would be a great name because Nashville rocks.
Right, yeah.
But the third one was volunteers because the ballpark sat so close to the state capitol. It had nothing to do with the University of Tennessee. So it was often shortened to Vols. But Sulphur Dale was a low-lying area. It often flooded the Cumberland River in the spring when it would go over its banks. That was a low-lying area, so close, 5 blocks away from the river. It would flood and games would have to be postponed or played at Tom Wilson's Park. The Negro League, Eli Giants owner had a park here beginning in 29. A lot of times they go over there and play. They go over to Vanderbilt and play, which is where their football field is located today, Dudley Field, for football. And it often flooded. They just couldn't get around that until a dam was built here. There are actually 2 dams built here that hold those floodwaters back in the spring. And so Sulphurdale was named Sulphurdale because Grantland Rice in 1908 said, let's call this Sulphur Springs, let's call this Sulphur Springs Dale. The low-lying area there had always been referred to as Sulphur Spring Bottom. And he said, let's make it something better. Fred Russell, who was, Rice was his mentor, was the sports editor of the National Banner here until it closed in 1998. He said that Grantland Rice couldn't find anything to rhyme with bottom, so he changed it to Dell because Grantland Rice liked to rhyme, you know that, and the Dean of American Sports Writers. So the name was Sulphur Springs Dale. A few months later, he wrote a poem and included the words Sulphur Dale, and that's where that name sat. And the sulfur comes from a natural sulfur spring there, right on that property. They turned it around, but you could still they put a building there over the spring itself, and there were other areas close by where you could go bring your glass jug and fill it up with that sulfur water.
Could you smell the sulfur in the ballpark?
You could smell the sulfur in the ballpark. That's why there were 3 reasons that they often referred to right field as the dump, which you might know. If the right fielder is standing at the base of right field, base of the fence in right field, his feet were 22.5 feet above the playing surface. It was really unusual. It was a 45-degree angle after. I'm not sure that picture does it justice.
Yeah, you
But
can see it. Yeah.
It's all a low-lying area. The street level is up there at the bottom of the fences are. So it's all low-lying, and you're hitting. That's why guys like Bob Lennon, who hit 64 home runs in 1954, one of the greatest offensive outputs in all of the Southern Association. He won every category, I think, in offense. He couldn't hit in the majors because Larry Gilbert would always load his lineup with left-handed hitters, and they developed this Sulphur-Dale stroke that they would hit up like they do now, really. And when he got to the majors, he could not bring that Sulphur-Dale stroke down to a normal level. So I think he hit 7 home runs the rest of his career in the majors. So it was kind of an unusual time for him also. This is a flyer that they gave away the last game of the season where he hit 2 or 3 home runs to end up with 64 for that season. They didn't even know that he was going to hit those that day, but they handed these out and ended up with 64 home runs, which I think 42 were hit at Sulphur Dale. And then this is that picture of, I was telling you about Hank Schenz. Let's see if I got it here somewhere. I don't know what I've done with it.
I got a picture.
Oh, yep. Here it is. This is Hank Schenz in sliding.
Yeah, it's much better to see.
And you can see the right field hill. Excuse me, that's a left field hill there. No, that's the right field. That's the right field hill. So if the right fielder was standing at the base of the fence, then his feet were 22.5 feet above the playing surface. So
was it as pronounced as at Crosley Field?
Yeah, Crawford Field was in left, I believe, and it was only 6 feet or something like that. This one was 22.5 feet high, but it was a 45-degree angle from about 20 feet outside of second base. Buster Boguski was known here. He became a Metro Nashville councilman for many years, was a sporting goods salesman. He played 7 years, I think. He was born here. And he told me, sitting in Waffle House eating a hamburger one day, that he often played second base so far back to where the field began to break that he often caught a fly ball hit a line drive that hit the base of the fence, bounced back to him, and he threw the runner out at first. So it was pretty short because it was only 262 feet,
Yeah.
and that's just almost unheard of, I guess, these days. This picture that I showed this earlier, didn't I? It's actually got 334 down left, 421 to deep center, and there's that 262. And this is undated, but I know it's before 49 because that's when they put the big scoreboard in left center that looked like the one at Ebbets Field out in the playing field.
Sulphur Dell is gone now, right?
They tore it down in 1969, but the last time that the Vols were in existence was 1963. It was Nashville and Birmingham were the only two members of the Southern Association between 1901 and 1961, its entire existence. And Nashville, due to inability to find some affiliations, did not play in 62, but they resurrected in 1963 as a member of the South Atlantic League. But they drew 15% of their attendance. They had on opening night, and then it was downhill from there, and they just turned in their franchise. They did continue to play baseball with amateur leagues. In 1965. Eddie Page and I can't think of his name. It's Farron Young, is country music star. They pulled their money and they made a deal to buy that ballpark, but they turned it into a speedway. And I think they had racing there for 13 weeks. It did not go well, and he had to pay off a bunch of money, and they didn't do anything with it. The city did nothing with it, could not draw a baseball team to come here. It was getting pretty dilapidated too, I'm sure. So in 1969, Nashville had decided to build a performing arts center right off the Capitol Square, and to tear down the Andrew Jackson Hotel, which had been around forever, and to build a performing arts center. And they took the rubble from the Andrew Jackson Hotel and they filled in that hole along with other things.
Thank you,
So
Bill.
that's,
I never saw I didn't see any baseball games there, but I will tell you, the hospitality at the Music City Bowl was
yeah,
unbelievable. I saw the
yeah,
first one when Alabama and Virginia Tech played.
yeah,
The right team won.
yeah, good.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, we love to have visitors. We have no,
Before we go any further, this is a great shot of Hank Schenz.
yeah,
And there's the telescope.
yeah,
This is from the Prager book.
yeah.
Must have for all baseball fans. Before I go to Ken, Skip, I got two more quick questions. So Schenz plays he's acquired at the end of June or July. He plays only 8 games. You're a big baseball fanatic. For a guy who only played in 8 games, I would assume he might be the most instrumental person in baseball history for doing what Harvey would say he allegedly did. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that.
Okay.
I think his legacy it remains with guys like you who would continue to be interested in that. They're still curious about that telescope, where that telescope
And
is.
my other question is, before we go to Ken, how you feeling about Nashville being the next expansion team? And what do you think their names would be?
I am a unpaid historical advisor for a group called Music City Baseball, which has taken on the name Nashville Stars. The Stars there was a Negro Leagues team in some form or fashion here in 1950 and 1951. We have found a picture of a bus that says Nashville Stars, member Negro Southern League. It's hard to date that. The back of the picture says 1957. The family says Anita, the youngest daughter, I wish I had a picture of that and I'd show you. You can actually go to mlbmusiccity.com and see that. And I have acquired, and so I'm not sure that 50-51 fits. I think when that picture was taken, it was a barnstorming team, and I don't think it was Anita. I think it was Laverne. But anyway, it adds to the interest. I have a picture. It was actually a broadside that was cut off, and it has 4 players standing with bats over their shoulders, and the front of their jersey says Stars, and it's evident because of the field in the background that it's taken at Sulphur Dell. There was a team we just didn't get any information, as you might imagine. sports writers did not send a reporter out to Negro League games or barnstorming games. I'm sorry, they just didn't. And these four players are Frank Russell, Jim Zapp, Sidney Bunch Jr., and Wilbur Atkinson. I talked to Wilbur Atkinson's daughter, talked to Butch Jim Zapp personally. I have seen, I do not own it, but he had signed a baseball, Jim Zapp, Nashville Balls, 1950. So I think he acknowledged that, but I think what it was really more of a team that was made up of players from the Nashville Cubs, which at one time had been a minor league team for Tom Wilson's Elite Giants in Baltimore, along with a couple of teams here that were sponsored by clubs, the New Era Club, the Del Morocco Club, and also the man who owned the New Era Club was, oh shoot, can't think of his name. Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. And he actually ended up buying the Baltimore Elite Giants after the Negro Leagues had pretty much diminished, and called them a barnstorming team, and played all their games, home games at Sulphur-Dale. You know, they played so few. They ran out of money real quick in the latter stages of the Negro Leagues. Sue Bridgeforth is who that was, SOO Bridgeforth. So I think it's Nashville Stars is a kind of a
name.
group of guys. It's just a name. I think
And
that was.
do they care about expansion or relocation from another team?
I think it's expansion is what they want. I think that's
Thank you.
exactly what. So they want to take that in, but also Nashville is loaded with stars. I mean, we've had a lot of people that have climbed on board this thing that are country music stars, and they're ready to. I'm not sure they're investors, but they're ready for the publicity to say yes. And you'll see a lot of those people singing the national anthem one day down on the ball field before a Nashville Stars game.
Thanks, Skip. Ken, you're up.
Well, I don't usually say a whole lot because I listen to all these gentlemen that are on here. And I've learned so much the past few months since Gary invited me when me and Art did a presentation during the Rickwood Field event. And I wanted to let Skip know that I've got, probably backwards, but anyhow, I've got a buddy of mine that is the historian with Rickwood Field, Clarence Watkins. You may have heard of him since he's from the Tennessee area. And he's written 3 books, one about baseball in Memphis, one about baseball in Birmingham, and one about baseball in Montgomery. And I've got the Memphis book. He signed all 3 of them for me about 3 years ago when I met him at Rickwood Field. I am a member of the Friends of Rickwood, which is pretty cool to keep that ballpark going. And we were talking, and so I said, when somebody started mentioning the Memphis town, I guess they had the Memphis Blues and the Memphis Chickasaws and the Memphis Chicks and all of that. And I said, well, I'm gonna go get that book. And I'm looking at that book, and in the book, there's a chapter in there about the fire, which y'all were talking about a minute ago at the ballpark there. Yeah. But there's also, I was looking through there, and I have a question for you San Francisco Giant fans, and I bet y'all know the answer, but I've got a photo here of Charlie Williams. Do y'all know the historical event regarding Charlie Williams?
Traded for Willie Mays.
Traded for Willie Mays, and he's the only person ever traded for Willie Mays, and he pitched with the San Francisco Giants for 7 years. Well, he played with the Memphis Blues back then. And so I'm thumbing through this book, and I said, "There's this photo right here. There's this picture right there of the young man that was traded for Willie Mays from the Mets to the San Francisco Giants and pitched 7 years with him." The other thing, and I may have mentioned this when we had our presentation, and Skip, I think you'd appreciate this, but I was in the ballpark at Rickwood Field the night that they announced Willie Mays had passed away.
I was too.
And being there, you know how quiet that place got and how surreal it was. And I think it was the top of the 7th inning, I believe, if I remember right. And I would bet you the video that they were going to show was going to be the video at the Major League Baseball game 2 nights later. And they went ahead and popped that video up there on that scoreboard out there. And you could and then the next thing you heard was everybody saying, Willie, Willie, Willie. So you got to be at a place that I was at that we'll never, ever forget. And his son, Michael, was at that game that night.
I worked that event for those 3 days. I was I worked for a staffing company for Major League Baseball. I was a guest services, whatever that is. Most of what I
Right.
did was the men's room's that way and the women's room is that way. I did a lot of that, but I was not in the grandstand, but I heard all that. It was pretty surreal, like you said, to hear those fans. Clarence Watkins is a very good friend of mine. He and I attended Memphis State together at the same time. My
Really?
nickname is
Okay.
Skip. His nickname is Skip. I saw where Gerald Watkins got an award from the city of Birmingham, I think,
Yep.
yesterday for what
Yep.
he did.
Yep.
Lamar Smith, all those guys have treated me royally. But one of the things I got to do is, I don't think they were planning on it, but when Willie Mays died, they brought his Hall of Fame plaque down to the Friends of Rickwood
Yes, they
conference
did.
room.
Yep.
And I was able to stand there with that and help people take pictures and tell some of the stories about Willie Mays from his days. The other thing is very meaningful to me. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we had a Negro League Southern Negro Leagues conference at Rickwood in the fall in October, and Bill Greason was the speaker. Now, Bill Greason played together in the 1948 Birmingham Black Barons. They were the last two living players, and I think they were very hopeful that those two could be on that field. You're right, for that major league game. And of course, they treated Bill Greason so royally. He's got a wonderful story. I actually wrote a story once again on baseball in Nashville.com that you can go in the search bar and write Greason. I'm sure it'll pop up there because I have a very personal. I had asked him one time if I could, at this conference, if I could have my picture made with him, and he said sure. And he put his arm around me, and it reminded me when I looked at it of my dad putting his arm around me in church. Memories of my dad just flowed. So little things like that are meaningful to me too.
Yeah, Art Black is a very good friend of mine.
Art Black's he's written those great books about Rickwood.
And matter of fact, he's got the last one he's got. He used two of my, because I collect like you historical images.
Yeah.
And I've donated like 60 historical images to the museum there at Rickwood of the Birmingham Barons and Black Barons.
Where are you? Where do you live?
I live in Texas.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of the things that you posted on that Friends of Rickwood.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's me. So
if you two fine gentlemen want to meet up, I could exchange your emails. Let me know.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to take so long.
No, it's great, Ken.
Hey, this is just Southern hospitality between me and Skip. That's what this is. Thank you, Gary.
I was going to tell Harvey, if you come to Nashville, Charlie Daniels there's a cemetery right behind me. Charlie Daniels' grave is 400 yards from the back corner of from our home. So come down here and see.
Devil went down.
You mentioned Fair and Young, one of my favorite songs, Hello Walls.
Oh yeah, that was written by Willie Nelson. Yeah.
Yes, one of my favorite composers.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question for Skip? All right, I want to leave you with a couple of things. So again, Henry Schenz, he's not really just a footnote in baseball. This is what, 51, shot around the world, the whole season with the Giants winning. Yeah. Might have been very instrumental in changing the path between the Giants and the Dodgers. Yeah. You get all the information from this great book from Saber. Yeah. You could get it on Amazon, or if you're a Saber member, you could download it like I did. And of course, Skip mentioned the Josh Prager book, which is, fabulous. Yeah. Just an incredible read that we've had Josh on. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, it's on there as well. So, Skip, just want to thank you for a great night. Give it up.
Thank you all. I'm grateful. Thank you for having me.
Skip, thanks again for short notice. Really appreciate it. And please join us another night. You don't have to talk. You could just hop on board.
You'll let a Yankees fan in? Is that okay?
All right. We will reconvene on the 19th, a Tuesday. Should be very, very interesting. Until then, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll hang around and talk some baseball, whoever wants to do that. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.